Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michaela McShane, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to today's Startup NASA Feature Series presentation. We are looking forward to hearing from Stratodynamics and hope you enjoy the presentation. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that your microphones will be muted throughout this presentation, so if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We will answer them during the Q&A session at the end. This monthly series provides an opportunity for NASA technology-inspired startup companies to share their stories, including how they got involved with NASA and where they are currently in the development of their new product or service. NASA's Technology Transfer Program ensures that innovations developed for exploration and discovery are broadly available to the public, and our Tech Transfer Expansion Program augments that mission to include a focus on entrepreneurial innovation and creating partnerships to help accelerate commercialization. We invite you to visit the NASA Technology Transfer website for more information on available licensing opportunities and other initiatives. And stay tuned for registration information for our next Startup NASA Feature Series presentation. And thank you for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Gary Pensek. Gary draws on 15 years of business development and external relationship experience in the commercial renewable energy sector. Seeing challenges through a variety of lenses, he is a senior leader skilled in integrating teams for high achievement goals. As a glider pilot, Gary can often be found at the airfield, as he not only studies wind energy closely, but also rides it. Gary holds an MBA from the University of Guelph. With that, I'd like to welcome Gary to share about his journey and tell you about his company. Gary?
Yes, thank you, Michaela. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really pleased to be able to present to everyone today. I've got about 15 slides as well, and so it'll take about maybe 15 minutes or so, and then I'm hoping to open it up for questions. So, and I'm going to be going through kind of where we are, how we got there, and what our future looks like. I'll try to share my screen now. Second page down. So I'd like to start with our selfie. This is a picture from our aircraft called the Hydron. It's a balloon-launched glider, stratospheric glider, and this is over New Mexico. We participated in a NASA Flight Opportunities Program last year in June, and we're pretty excited. This particular flight went up to 98,000 feet and released over New Mexico. As I said, it's a stratospheric glider. It's balloon launched. It gets to altitude by balloon. It's released and then returns back to the landing point. So in this case, back to a site at Spaceport America. So how did we get to the stratosphere? Well, we began back in about 2016. My colleague Nick Crane and I participated in something called the NASA Space Race Challenge, which was run by the Center for Advancing Innovation. And essentially it was a pitch competition utilizing NASA technology with the award that you got to enter into a kind of a licensing agreement or discussion with NASA, depending on how your pitch went. And so we looked at a kind of control system for UAVs, and our original idea was to use that for a high altitude aircraft that would essentially be a retrievable radio sonde. So for example, in the US, there's about 75,000 radio sondes that are launched daily, and about 80% of these are lost. So we thought this was a problem, that it was not only that these were getting lost and not being reused, but also there's a fair number of environmental waste. And so that we spun out of that, Stratodynamics was spun out of that. We quickly started our prototyping with a Hydron, using kind of mostly off-the-shelf components, and a industrial type autopilot developed by UAVOS, and began to become a leader in high altitude flight. And so at this point now, where we've got a couple iterations of our Hydron, we've done multiple flights in global locations, as well as achieved many records along the way. And we had also flown through restricted and many commercial airspace. But along the way, in our discussions with NASA, we also talked to the inventor who had invented the piece of technology that we were looking at originally, and found out that he also developed something called infrasound technology. So these are microphones that can detect infrasound below 20 hertz, below audible range for hearing. And since then, we've been able to develop that technology and have quite a few number of trials in place with commercial collaborators around the world. And we're also looking at still expanding our flight services with our Hydron and other aircraft as well. So we met Dr. Shams, the inventor of the microphone, through our many discussions with NASA. And what we liked with working with him and other inventors there, that he was very actively engaged in developing the technology, had a suite of technology related to it. So it was continuing to be developed, and so there was a lot of technology know-how that could be shared. And so we saw many applications for this with infrasound in turbulence and wake vortices detection, as well as environmental phenomena like earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, and anything that generates infrasound would be a useful application. So here we are today with our products. We have a platform that we offer focused specifically on high altitude launches. So we have our Hydron aircraft that goes up with balloon, and we're working on new ones there. We've got global launch locations, and we customize the Hydron for our customers. So whatever they need, we can modify the airframe, or typically it's the nose of the aircraft for various sensors and probes that might be out there, looking up, looking down, other optical instruments. And we're also looking at it and using developing a program for a TAPS types platform that can do persistence flying above civilian airspace. So our goal really is there to stay focused on high altitude flights above most of the civilian air traffic. The second piece that we're working on is infrasound detection. With the infrasound microphone, we're really focused on developing utilizing this for detecting turbulence for the aviation sector. And we've got multiple projects either finished or ongoing with customers now. So the turbulence problem. Turbulence is a significant problem for the airline industry. It not only can create, it's the leading cause of injury to passengers and crew. It can damage aircraft, and to avoid it, it can burn extra fuel to go around it. Currently, there's no way that aircraft can detect turbulence ahead of aircraft, specifically what's called clear air turbulence, turbulence you can't see or it's not marked by some other phenomena like clouds. So the airline industry uses a combination of forecasting and pilot reports to sort of indicate where turbulence might be. So it's still fairly granular and coarse. And don't I get it wrong. I mean, I think many of us have been on flights where we've experienced turbulence, before the seatbelt sign comes on. And if you're lucky, you can get into your seat, but sometimes you can get injured if you're not. So it is a significant problem, costing upwards of about $2 billion annually for air carriers. So our solution is to utilize the infrasonic microphone to detect clear air turbulence. And turbulence emits an infrasound in the low frequency range. The advantage of that using low frequency is low frequency sound, say below 5 hertz, can travel long distances with little attenuation, so with little signal loss. And as the frequency increases, the distance that the sound can travel drops off. So it provides a method for early prediction of clear air turbulence before the aircraft approaches. And we're seeing with our trials that we're seeing positive results there with being able to detect turbulence ahead of aircraft. Our flight services. This is where we are looking to the future. We have our Hydron 2, which is the balloon launch glider that I've spoken about. It can carry about a 1 kilogram payload. That's available and operating today. We're working on the next iteration of that, which we call the Hydron SO, a larger aircraft that can carry a 5 kilogram payload and a volume of about a 5U CubeSat. So that's 10 by 10 by 50 centimeters. What we're featuring in the design of the Hydron SO is that it's going to be customized for stratospheric flight. So in the stratosphere, you've got very thin air, The Reynolds numbers that you have to work with in that region make it more challenging. You've got control issues, and so if you're flying there, you pay a higher penalty if you have turbulence, for example. So we have a custom aircraft there. But one of the features of this is that the nose of the aircraft will be able to come off and be replaced with a payload. So the payload will be fairly customizable that the customers can use, like designing essentially their own nose, and it would clip into the aircraft so that we can swap payloads out quickly and do multiple flights during a campaign. With our strategic collaborator, UAVOS, who has developed the autopilot, we're also looking to bring a persistence aircraft. This one is a solar-powered aircraft, so it's not balloon launched. It's solar-powered, and the design is that it travels by its power during the day and charges the battery with solar power, and then consumes that battery power during the nighttime. And then when the sun comes up the following day, it can recharge the battery. So it can stay up for persistent times over an area and station keep or do any kind of number of flight plans for multiple days. And we are looking to trial these things, continue to expand our business cases with this in sort of the Earth observation and surveillance market. It features this autopilot, which is fully autonomous. We can modify the flight plan in real time on the ground. We can set any kind of number of flight plans, serpentine, loitering pattern, and modify that as needed as we come down. This particular autopilot also features a soaring function, which is interesting for the glider. So if there's any kind of lift there, we can try to harness that and stay up and extend the duration. Briefly get asked a lot about what does a ConOps look like for the balloon launch glider. So initially, before we do any kind of flight, there's a lot of preparation, looking at weather and forecasting. We can pretty accurately detect or predict how far the balloon will travel during a launch sequence. So we're looking for optimal weather times where the balloon will travel where we want it to. To go up to our maximum altitude, it takes approximately 60 to 90 minutes. Then the hydron is released from the balloon. And this is a really interesting and challenging time because we're at an area where the atmosphere is very thin. The aircraft is essentially in a microgravity environment. It's on its way up, it's released, it's in a microgravity condition. And we can't really control the orientation of the aircraft as well. And it can accelerate very quickly. And if you don't get it under control quickly, you can have all kinds of turbulence issues or Mach-induced tip stalls. So in the last flights, we were able to release, for example, at 98,000 feet and get control by 96,000 feet, which is higher than an SR-71 Blackbird. So very high altitude flights in a very thin atmosphere. Once we've leveled off, then it takes 4 or 5 hours to come down. It's a glider, it comes down at a very slow descent rate. We can bring it down faster if we want, but it can loiter over an area, it can collect data obviously on the way up and on the way down as well. And we can target specific regions to fly over. So what are we doing now for the future? So we're looking to expand our turbulence detection system. We have multiple trials in progress, everything from on a commercial-sized aircraft, passenger jet, to our own hydron and also small drones. And we've got a number of trials in process. And all of those are indicating very encouraging results about the ability for infrasound to predict turbulence before the aircraft arrives. I can speak a little bit about some of the results from our last flight at Spaceport America in June, where we worked with the University of Kentucky. They were trialing a number of sensors to detect turbulence during this program, and it was sponsored by the Flight Opportunities Program with NASA. We had the infrasonic microphone on it, accelerometers, and a 5-hole probe. The accelerometers are on the aircraft, and the aircraft by itself is a very sensitive instrument. It responds to any fluctuations in the airflow. It's not powered, it's gliding. So any changes in the air or movement from turbulence or gusts, we can easily see with accelerometers. And so we were looking at using both of these probes to kind of cross-validate Are we hearing sound? Are we hearing turbulence, if you will, before we experience it or before the high 5-volt probe detects it? And as I said, the indications are yes, that we are. Well, that's it. That's very brief. We are closing it off, and we are looking for investment as well, if you're interested. But this is a final picture from our Hydron looking out over the wing from about 88,000 feet. And we just love these beautiful photographs of the curvature of the Earth. And thank you very much. My pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks so much, Gary. So we received a couple of questions from the presentation. So I thank everyone who submitted them. Feel free to continue submitting questions while we're doing the Q&A by typing them into the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we have time. So Gary, let me know when you're ready, and I will start asking the questions.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. What was your background experience before the NASA challenge?
Well, my background experience is I've got a mechanical engineering background. I've got an MBA that I got later in life, and I was also working in the wind energy business, developing commercial scale wind projects. So my interest has really been on harnessing natural energy in positive and pleasing ways. So, I enjoy sailing, I like wind energy, and I'm also a glider pilot. Is that important, I guess, for how I got here? I'm not so sure it is. I think what it is that I had an interest in technology. I had an idea. I had it was a combination of a variety of interests that I brought forward in this idea and also the business idea.
Great, thanks. What kind of license did you get from NASA for the infrasonics technology? Exclusive, startup? Is there a field of use?
Yeah, it's a startup license, and it's a field of use related to basically detecting man-made and natural events from infrasound. So there's a kind of a fairly wide field of use for it, and there's a suite of patents that we licensed from NASA, all related to the infrasound technology that essentially Dr. Shams and his inventors worked on. So I think there's maybe about 6 patents that we licensed with NASA.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. For the Aspis Duo, what is the payload? How long can it fly during winter, and how much power is available to the payload?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your question here.
How much power is available to payload?
Okay, well, so the flight operation really depends on the solar available energy. So, and it's based really on latitude. So if you can fly, so in the winter at the equator, you can stay up for days, or if you fly at northern latitudes, you're really limited to the sort of summer months. So say July, August. So essentially the further north you go, the smaller the season is that you can fly long duration flights. This particular one can carry about a 5-kilogram payload. And I'd have to get you back on the power supply. It's a bit of management between how high you want to fly, what's the power draw from the payload itself, and where's the latitude to sort of know basically how long the capacity can stay up for. But if that person wants to contact me directly, I'd happy to get a more detailed answer.
Okay, I think that's good for right now.
Okay.
How was NASA's intellectual property developed further by Stratodynamics? Did you work to develop directly with NASA to do so?
The technology that is, yes, we're developing it further. So there are derivatives from that are part of our intellectual property. The technology, the patents are really mostly hardware specific. So the microphones themselves, some technology related to the microphones. So these particular microphones are particularly the larger one is one of the most sensitive in the world with a very low signal to noise ratio. But utilizing that, say, for example, on a ground-based array where you've got 3 of them, there was some developed technology for detecting the angle of arrival, locating where the turbulence event was relative to the ground-based array. But it hadn't been tried on aviation yet, so it hadn't been tried on an aircraft yet. So there's other issues with noise that it induces as well. but also trying to utilize it for a predictive type of application, and that's what we're developing. So the predictive capabilities of the infrasound microphones on an aircraft, as well as trying to improve the localization techniques or methods for ground-based arrays as well. So it can also detect turbulence from the ground, I should add.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is a long one. I'm going to read that. I'm working within the biofuels market, acquired a startup NASA license myself to manufacture algae film bioreactors to upcycle carbon emissions and food waste on landfills. I wanted to ask about funding the development of a prototype. What would you recommend to acquire funding for developing the prototype, and whom do you contact to design and develop?
Funding for prototypes. So, it's a hard question, but there are a lot of government grants out there for funding ideas. So, depends on where your technology are, but I would, if you're in the U.S., look at the SBIR program and also the STTR program if you're connected with academia. So those ones there's a multiple phases there. So you can look at, and each department, U.S. government department has a program. So the Department of Energy, probably Agriculture, NASA as well will have these SBIR programs. That's a good place to start. And if you have something that you want to fly, then there's other programs like the Flight Opportunities Program, but I don't think that's what you were implying there. Okay.
Thank you. All right, next question. Has anybody made stratospheric aerosol measurements from these platforms? So I'll read it. Has anybody made stratospheric aerosol measurements from these platforms?
Not, they've done it from high altitude balloons. From a glider, we've talked to a few clients about considering doing aerosol studies from our aircraft. So it is possible. We're aware of a few instruments that can detect aerosols. So we've been working with some other people about detecting sort of dust that comes up, African dust that might go up and it's transmitted in the stratospheric corridor, for example. Volcanic ash is another one that's worth studying as well. But that's it. I guess that, yes, it's possible, and we've looked at it, but we actually haven't done it yet. So if you're interested, please reach out to me.
Thanks. Okay, next question. How is Stratodynamics preparing for upper class E traffic management, specifically aircraft-to-aircraft communications in flight above FL60?
Very good question. Yes, well, I think at this point, the detect and avoid systems that are available are not FAA certified, but they're coming. And so I think in the interior, there's a couple of ways we approach this. One is that we can fly in restricted airspace, so we can basically, get a whole airspace dedicated to our flight during that time. And then so other aircraft are prevented, and that provides a kind of separation distance. We have an ADS-B transponder on our aircraft, so we can be seen as well as we can detect other aircraft that have ADS-B transponders from the ground station, so we can provide some separation distance for that. And at this point, it's really basically in civilian airspace, depending on where you are. It's going through a waiver process to be able to do a trial through above into Class E airspace, lower Class E airspace, and also through civilian airspace, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is there an advantage to using infrasound from stratosphere compared to ground or low altitude?
Well, yeah, that's an unknown question at this point. At upper altitudes, the infrasound signals will travel farther with it. There'll be less signal loss, so less attenuation. In our flight that we did with the Spaceport America and University of Kentucky, the infrasound microphones still work really quite well in the boundary layer. The boundary layer has a lot more turbulence, so it was easier to detect things. There could be some refraction that happens with infrasound off the stratosphere as well to be explored. But there are some some special things we have to consider when we're measuring it for sound at those high altitudes. But I think there's one advantage is that sound travels further up there and can also be refracted as well.
Okay. Next question. Does it offer a real-time output, or is the data examined once landed?
It can do both. So there is some capability to send telemetry or payload data through the radio telemetry to a ground station, and we can actually monitor some performance of the payload in real time at our ground station. So we can look at that, and we can actually send controls to the payload, turn things off and on, so we can do some modification in flight. If it requires a large data set, video, for example, a lot of that is just stored on a database of some sort, and then we can retrieve it when the aircraft returns. So it depends on how much bandwidth the client needs.
Sounds good. Okay, next question. Our 747s have predictive wind shear warnings. Could you use our data to integrate into your metadata model?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Our 747s have predictive wind shear warnings. Could you use our data to integrate into your metadata model?
Yes, absolutely. So then that would be a great cross comparison to see if the wind shear data and our data is aligned. So if they're seeing events that are wind shear trigger a warning, that would be a great trial to do with our system. So it's a number of ways that can be done. We can connect our system to the aircraft avionics and then do some analysis either after the data is collected, or we could collect the data separately. So a couple different ways to do that, but it is possible to compare the two.
Okay, sounds good. I think we have time for one more question. So how have you funded the development of your technologies and the growth of your company?
A couple different ways. We've been able to get a few government grants that have helped us to fund the technology. We've also been able with the Hydron to generate revenue through the program that, the Flight Opportunities Program, for example, provides some funds to do flight campaigns. So we've done some of the mixture of grants, revenue, and also we've been bootstrapped for the next few years. And as I said, we're actually out looking for raising capital for the next phase, next 18 months of development.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gary. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. If we didn't get to your question during the Q&A session, we will follow up with you by email within the next week. If you have additional questions, then please feel free to submit them to the email address at the very bottom of the screen, and we'll be sure to follow up with answers to those as well. Once again, we appreciate you all being here with us today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.